Can you imagine two sweet-ass dudes like us in that car traveling through the desert across America? Wouldn't it look so fucking cool? We would go places and park the car where we know we look cool, hang out smoking cigarettes, leaning against the car, looking cool, and let people look at us. We could get fucking trashed on drugs in the middle of nowhere and drive 150 miles an hour naked down the freeway and hang out the windows shooting shotguns at freeway signs and fucking historical landmarks and fucking jackrabbits. Dude, we could make some jackrabbit jerky and jackrabbit shoulder pads for our new leather jackets.
Dude, you're Lord Humongous. Dude, you are fucking Lord Humongous. You are Lord fucking Humongous. The Master of Fire. The King of the Wasteland.
Hello and welcome to the Movie Club podcast. This is episode number 26. The Movie Club podcast is sort of a book club format where a bunch of different bloggers, podcasters from various locations around the web get together and discuss a few movies. Be aware that the movies that we will be discussing today, we will be spoiling them. So all three of the movies that we're talking about will be full-on spoilers. Make sure you've seen the films before you listen to us talking about them. And those three movies that we'll be talking about today are, in order, Another Earth, Bellflower, and Mr. Nobody. And I think the reason that we came to the conclusion of these three films is originally it was kind of supposed to be a Film Junk versus Row 3 thing. Love versus the hate, and it kind of just evolved from there. But let's just go around our digital table here and introduce each other. My name is Andrew James. I'm from row3.com.
I'm Matthew Price, one of the co-hosts of the Mammo podcast, and you can find me on Row 3 as well.
I'm Kurt Halfyard, also of Row 3.
And I'm Jay of filmjunk.com and thedocumentaryblog.com. Very
good. And so the order that we've decided, like I said, was going to be to start with Another Earth. I can't remember, was this suggested by one of you guys in particular? I don't think I had anything to do with this one. Because originally we were thinking about talking about The Fountain. And Cloud Atlas was thrown around for a while, and we finally decided on Another Earth. Was that anybody's suggestion here?
I guess in part it was me, because when Cloud Atlas's DVD release got delayed, and people just don't have access to it, and God knows not very many people saw it theatrically. It kind of refocused the nature of this episode, and now it almost is interesting to look at the sort of indie landscape of melding of sci-fi and drama. So, I mean, Another Earth and Bellflower and Mr. Nobody, they're all released within a 2-year period, and they all kind of go together in that way. So with that sort of thematic connection aside, I guess that's how Another Earth got in there.
Okay. And then usually what we do here is just kind of go around and for each film, starting with Another Earth, is just our initial thoughts. Is this a first-time watch? Is this the 10th time you've watched? And then just initial impressions. So for me, starting out with Another Earth, I don't know. I saw it theatrically a couple of years ago when it came out, and loved the shit out of it. And aside from one bit that we'll get into later, I think it's almost a perfect movie. I really, really love it. And watching it again today, this is the second time since the theatrical one I saw, I think I love it even more. So
you want to set it up plot-wise, Andrew?
Sure, I can do that. The film starts off with a young girl. I don't have IMDb open in front of me, so I don't know directors or actors' names at all. But it's a Melanie Laurent lookalike. She is a young, very bright girl with a huge future ahead of her. She's been admitted to MIT. One night she's partying, celebrating before she goes off to college, and on the way home, there's a radio broadcast explaining that another Earth, a planet just like Earth, has come into view. So if you just look out the window or, look up at the night sky, you can see it. And so she's driving home a little bit inebriated. She looks up at the sky, and while she's looking at this other planet, she slams into a family sitting at a four-way stop. And it's a father, a mother, and a young child, a young boy. And it also, we find out that the mother was also pregnant. So she kills everybody except the father. 4 years pass. She goes to the father's... she's let out of prison. And then she goes over to the father, Ethan, from Lost, if that helps. She goes over to his house sort of to make amends, and she can't bring herself to tell him that she's the one that killed his whole family. Instead, she pretends to be from a cleaning company, and their relationship blossoms. Sorry, this isn't very concise. But meanwhile, she's also writing this essay to try to get win a ticket to Earth 2, as it's called, to possibly see her other self, too. I don't know if that made any sense, but again, hopefully you've seen the film before.
I can't believe I wasted all that time watching it. That was...
It was very concise.
So, I loved it. Matt, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, so it's funny because... so first of all, just in terms of what you just did to describe the plot, so I didn't really engage with it very much. And I think, these things are, to some degree, it's just subjective, but... purely just on the level of the style of it, which I found to be kind of precious and sort of obvious, and then also I really think this is one of those cases where the casting is so limited by the inability of the filmmakers to get the actors they wish they could get. And I personally, I think William Mapother, who is in the business because he's Tom Cruise's first cousin, is kind of not very interesting. And I don't care what happens to him. It's hard to connect to a movie that's supposed to be about these two people when they're just not... It's not that they're necessarily like bad actors from a technical perspective, but they're not interesting. They have no charisma.
Okay.
So it's, and then also I just think it's about a 25-minute idea for me. That'd be a really good, sort of mid-length Vimeo.
Okay, interesting. Have you just seen it the one time?
I just saw it the one time, just a couple nights ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the idea is okay. It's sort of an interesting notion, especially when it starts to play around with this idea that the two Earths have developed in total parallel until they encounter each other and realize there's another one. And that idea of sort of getting a do-over. I mean, I think there's stuff there in the script, and I think there's enough there to... And I think with actors that I connected with more, there would have been enough to stretch it out, because if the scenes themselves played out well, then I think you could make a feature out of it, but I don't think with those actors you could.
Okay. Kurt?
I saw this film first at the Fantasia Film Festival, and so I knew really very little about it walking in. I don't know if I knew anything about it other than the film's quite pretty poster with Britt Marling and the huge Earth on the cover, and the probably 50 to 100 word film festival blurb. And I was completely fine and happy with the sort of Sundancey, for lack of a better phrase, drama that was in. I kind of agree with Matt in the sense that William Mapother, is it Mapother? It's funny you say he's related to Tom Cruise, because I always think of him as kind of like the skeevy doppelganger to Nathan Fillion, but I wasn't really on board with his character, but I think I was really, really on board with her character and looked at it as her story. So I as a following of her journey, I was completely on board with the film. And it's that type of film. It's kind of sleepy when you're watching it. It's not really in any hurry to get anywhere, and the sci-fi elements are totally relegated to the background. They only really come forth in one, like, sort of M. Night Shyamalan Signs-like scene where the scientist actually radio contacts herself on the radio. So I was fine with that. I was like, okay, this ain't hard sci-fi. This is just a metaphor in the background. And I was fine with the movie, but the ending, I liked the snap ending, so that's where the movie completely clicked for me. So it's one of those weird movies where you're kind of okay with it when you watch it, but when you get to the ending and you start thinking back about it, and you're thinking less about the characters and the acting and the cinematography and stuff, and you just start to mull on the consequences of the ending and then what the movie is based on that. So on those terms, I quite like the movie, and I really enjoyed the heck of it watching it a second time for this podcast.
Me?
Yeah, go for it.
This is my second time watching Another Earth, and I didn't see it in a festival setting or anything like that. And I don't know. I think it's just a poorly realized, absolutely mediocre drama that hides behind a loosely established and totally underused high concept that completely dominates the story. And it's one of those cases where I wish they ditched all of the drama and just focused on purely on the second Earth concept.
And I can sort of see that point of view, because I too would like to see like an entire movie based around another Earth and all the possibilities that are there. But I don't know. I think that the drama in this, to me, it feels very. I don't know. It's got some holes in it, I guess, plot-wise. Like, you can pull it apart, but I think it's very believable, and I'm able to really sympathize with both characters. And I don't know, the idea of maybe a second chance or to see the ones you love is a possibility out there. I think that's a really creative concept. I don't see the sort of stifled look at the movie, like very basic and Sundancey, like you guys say. I feel like it was really creative and well thought out. Like, here's a concept. Let's make characters, real life Earth characters that people can latch onto and maybe empathize with, maybe sympathize with, along with the concept. I mean, it was clear the director or the storyteller did not set out to make a hard sci-fi film. They set out to make a character study with a creative twist to put it together and maybe add a little context, add a little suspense, drama, even a little mystery to it.
Andrew, I think you hit it exactly on the head. So exactly what you're saying. I think if the film has characters that you can identify with, where you kind of imprint on them and what's happening to them is of sort of a high importance to you, then it is a really good movie. And when they don't, then you're left going, this could be, there. Like I just did, in that just subjective way, I just did not connect to either of them particularly. And I think also that idea of sort of getting a second chance is like, it's a nice idea, but it's so false to the actual experience of tragic loss. It's almost like a kind of religious afterlife kind of idea, like not to pull a bunch of other movies into this, but like the ending of The Woman in Black made me so angry that like so like I think there's a kind of a fantasy wish fulfillment element to that's less appealing to me.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Part of it is like for me, immediately, I'm just, if you're not into, if you don't latch on with the characters right away and just sort of sympathize with them, I can see you just slowly fading and liking the movie less and less as it goes along. But, I mean, from moment one where she smashes into them and then gets out of the car and looks at all the carnage that she's created, and then we just flash forward to 4 years later, like, instantly, I'm compelled. I saw the devastation. I personally also think she's a really great actress. But I could feel that heartbreak in seeing her life shattered literally in a second. And then I'm interested to find out how she's going to pull together right as she gets out of prison. And then it just goes deeper and deeper. And I don't know. I never saw anything coming at me. I always found every bit of interaction new and surprising and interesting and very heartfelt.
Well, I do think it's safe to say that once the two characters form their sort of arrangement with the cleaning, that it's pretty. It would be a very weird movie if they never got to the point of her confessing, if they just never did that. Like, I think that was the one obvious thing that, and I think a lot of people that complain about this movie feels overlong, which it really isn't. I think it's just 90 minutes. But the is that people just want it to get there and move on, and the movie does want to linger in the no man's land of the two of them sort of, climbing out of their collective shells. And I do like, I mean, it may be cliche in one sense or overly precious or whatever, but I love the scene where he does open up to her with the saw, and the saw itself is it's almost like a haunting little melody. It almost sounds like a human voice with this piece of metal. I think that there's lots of little moments peppered along their journey that may forgive just sort of the grungy space with which it occupies.
That Saw scene sums up a lot of the movie for me, where you can take someone that is great at some unusual art form, throw it on screen, and distract people and have them get caught up in that art form and marvel at the sound coming out of that saw, and have them completely forget about how terrible everything else is in the film. I mean, it just how many shots do we have to have of her walking down the street with the second Earth looming in the background to remind us that we're watching something with this high concept kind of supposedly holding it up. It seems to me to be a lot of sleight of hand to kind of cover up for a story that's not very interesting, and a lot of performances that aren't very interesting, and people who aren't very interesting. You just get enough interest from news broadcasts, radio broadcasts, saw players, and stuff like that to distract you just enough to. It's like the T.J. Mackey line, the whole, I will teach you how to convince women that you are charming and or whatever. Like, trick women into thinking you were a smart and caring man. This movie tricks you into thinking it's a smart and caring movie by putting all of these little references to science fiction and these little ideas and concepts that seem unique but are not explored at all. I mean, at least not in my opinion.
Well, I think maybe there's a confusion of like throwing a bunch of things together and not being too specific in the attempt to allow maybe a wider audience to be able to generalize with the movie and not, be and there's certainly flaws to that approach. I wish I could personally draw the line between something like the Sixth Sense, which it just kind of makes me angry, and I feel that huge chunks of that film are the sleight of hand that you just described, and why other films, when they do this sort of, they graft on elements into a standard story, why I find that pleasurable. I guess I'm failing as someone who thinks critically about movies if I cannot actually pinpoint or explain why I'm on this side of the line for this movie and that side of the line for that movie.
It tricked you.
It tricked
got
me, and I was
scammed,
happy
Kurt.
to be tricked. I mean, suspension of disbelief, and often going to the movies are an active sleight of hand, and this one happened to work on me.
I think a lot of it too is this is one of those movies where, at least for me, it's kind of what would I do in this situation. And what makes this one even better is you've got two characters dealing with so many different things, like the what would I do, or thinking about the situation, all the what ifs that come into my head while I'm watching this.
I can tell you
is a
what
lot.
I would not do is clean someone's house and play Wii boxing. If there was a second Earth approaching our Earth and a mirror universe to our universe, I would not spend my time trying to reconcile something that happened 4 years ago by slowly cleaning somebody's house and befriending them. It probably wouldn't even be on my mind because this extraordinary event is taking place.
I don't know.
That completely trumps everything.
But that extraordinary event is stretched out over many years, right? Like the timeline of the movie.
And also, wait. But in other better movies, you believe it. Like in Last Night, you believe that people mundanely go about their lives in the face of something really large because the characters and performances engage you enough to make you believe it.
Exactly. It's
so,
not. I mean, I'm not saying
it's not the how. It's not the what. It's the how.
Right.
I don't know, and I find that completely believable. That like Kurt said, this is something that's been going on for 4 years. If you just killed an entire family accidentally, I mean, you got to try to put yourself in her shoes. You might go and try to just make this guy's life a little bit better. Do anything you can. Granted, it might be for her to feel better, but I also think she really feels like she needs to make amends somehow, and this is the only way. It just happens to present itself this way.
Okay, well...
Like, she didn't go in planning, okay, I'm going to clean this guy's house for 6 months. That was not her plan. That's just her weakness, and that's what came out, you know? I don't know. I find that totally believable.
I will give you that they saw the planet 4 years earlier, but the discovery of the planet being a mirror to our planet is discovered during the period in which she's cleaning this guy's house. Mm-hmm. And I would say that is probably the bigger reveal.
But they do engage. They do talk about it over the course of the movie. Like, they don't spend all their time talking about it, but they actually actively, they don't ignore it completely.
Yeah, and they show people, like, people out on the street, you know, holding up crazy, the end is near, and tin hats and shit like that. I mean, it's addressed.
Yeah, that in the most obvious, lazy way. A guy wearing a placard with a tinfoil hat.
Well, there's a bunch of discussions too, right? Like, it isn't just that one thing.
There are a couple of...
Because it's not important to the story.
Exactly. Which is the main problem with this movie, is that you've got this amazing story happening in the background, and it's like they keep turning your head away saying, nope, watch our little lame middle of the road melodrama, avert your eyes from the amazing event that's happening in the background, and focus on these two actors that are not engaging or interesting in any way.
If I may move forward to a lovely way that all three of these films are connected, is the sort of a narcissistic self-involvement with the cosmic. I mean, you could dump a lot of other movies in there too, Melancholia and other things. I don't know why there was a rash of these movies in that short period of time, but all three of these movies have that reflection of the personal within the cosmic. I mean, even Tree of Life has that too. And I don't know whether this is a relatively high concentration in one particular spot, or whether this has existed in cinema all the way across. Because when I think of something like the original Solaris, I don't quite see it the same way that I would see this particular strand of movies. But and it might explain why you take such a dislike. That particular flavor may stick in your craw, as they say.
Come on, Kurt, come on. Connected to Voyage to the Moon. Come on.
If I can go all the way back.
Can I just nitpick a little bit here?
Of course.
I'm amazed that no one's brought up Kumar. So go
I'm
away,
about
nitpick
to.
away.
Yeah, that's one of the most distressing parts of this film is Kumar as her little Indian spirit animal. That this beautiful blonde white girl who claims that she doesn't want to be around people or do too much talking, yet takes a job as a high school janitor, which makes zero sense to me. Befriends Kumar, and for some reason he's pouring bleach into his eyes and his ears, and he's the guy that spouts off little pieces of advice as she curls up to him in bed. And what is he? Like, what do we know about him other than he's Indian, he's in Wes Anderson's films, and he's a spirit animal? I mean, he's completely useless in this movie, and it's totally like you can't tell me that they're casting him for his acting abilities. Not that he needs any, because his character is so thinly written. And that to me is like the most annoying thing. And then with her character, she's supposed to be this person who's interested in astronomy and the cosmos and the universe, and she's applied to MIT, and she's out on this drive, and this is the first time that she hears about a planet approaching Earth.
Well, in all fairness, the radio broadcaster says this is the first time it's visible. She may have been very much aware. This is the first time you can see it with the eye. Correct. Or,
correct.
Who knows? That party may have been around that it was going to be visible that night. I mean,
so that night the planet.
I can buy your other nitpicks. I can totally. If it were up to me, Kumar's out of the film. Sorry, Kumar, you're out of the film. But that one I find it a little harder to like. That's a true nitpick in that once you're out of the movie, a lot of little things that may or may not be there start to come out.
Well, it's a very lazy way to get her to avert her eyes from the road, I think. And
but it's also critical. That's also her judgment point, right? That's the divergent point of the film.
There's this consistent rush to the thematic where it makes no sense for the people.
Yes, yeah.
Like there's just, you know what, Kurt? There's just too much tabula and not enough rasa. like they're just trying to get you to project onto these ideas, but they haven't done any work on the actual nutsy boltsy, like, here are the people that we want you to project onto.
Well, wait till we get to Mr. Nobody. But I actually, where you guys see that as a criticism of a film, I can see that as a boon. I mean, sometimes using drama and a collection of ideas assembled in a dramatic play, story, whatever, is a good way to bring up these questions and bring people that are not the hard sci-fi or whatever sort of junkies into it in a more casual way. Like it's almost like a gateway kind of movie as opposed to the end point kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just that, you know what, when you say that, like, one of the things that I think is really wrong with this is that it constantly points up other better movies. Like, when you talk about that idea of sort of like a science fiction movie for people that aren't big science fiction nerds, I think a movie like Moon is a better example of that than this. Like, there's just better examples of that.
I also don't buy her as, just in general, someone who's interested in astronomy. I mean, I don't know if we're supposed to assume that because she connects this incident with Earth 2 that she completely loses her interest in astronomy or something, but she gets.
I don't know. She sells the cosmonaut story. That I seen that scene really plays like where with her.
That scene
really.
That scene plays like her audition tape. She is so.
That's her Anne Hathaway moment. Is that what you're saying?
She just over emotes. She's over the top, and she reads like she knows this is her scene in the film, and it plays like an audition tape to me. And I mean, that's something that's subjective, but I don't buy that for a second. And
to me, that's the scene where she finally kind of comes out of her shell because she's talking about something. She forgets everything else for a second and talks about this one thing that she's really passionate about and really excited about. And also, I mean,
confronts it's the theme of the movie all in one little speech. I mean, it's her confronting herself, and of course the final scene of the movie is her literally confronting herself. I mean, that's why I don't have a problem with me not sympathizing or necessarily caring about the music professor, because I mean, this is her journey to figure her own to actually deal with what she did. And she's avoiding it throughout the entire movie. Everything that she does is an avoidance until she literally meets herself at the end.
Mm-hmm. And remember, she's a completely different person than she was in the first 2 minutes of the movie. Instantly, she clearly needs like psychological help, and she's just a different person. So yeah, like maybe her interest in astronomy has kind of waned to some extent.
I don't understand how you can tell that she's a different person. We don't even know her.
It's not from the performance.
Oh, see, I disagree. I think the performance is great, but because you just infer, they talk about how smart she is and how bright she is, and she's going to MIT. I think there's a narration, I believe, in the beginning, and she's in a group of friends, and she's very outgoing and happy and interested in things. And then when the girl that we know through most of the movie is very standoffish, very quiet, looking in the corner, trying to not be noticed, trying to stay away from it just, to me, maybe this is just me looking into it, but yeah, to me, I instantly can tell that she's just a shell of the person that she used to be. And maybe you're right, Jay. I mean, it's fair criticism that maybe that's just me seeing something that isn't there, but...
I mean, it's assumed that she is. All I mean is I'm just saying we never really got to know her before the incident, which I would have liked to have gotten to know her so that we got a better idea of what's been thrown away or what's been changed about her.
I think that moment where she's talking about the cosmonaut, that's her kind of snapping out of it, and you see this is how she was. When she's smiling, she's bright-eyed. In those 2 minutes, she's a completely different person than the rest of the movie, and I think that's her interest in her old interests coming to light.
Well, she does have a poster in her room of space, so clearly she's a fan.
And they use it too as a Rita Hayworth, if you will. She's looking at it as escapism. I think it's just her way of laying in bed and escaping. I don't know.
Well, the other thing might be the perhaps not showing or deciding not to have a lengthy prologue where she's this happy, peppy, full of potential thing is sort of the Louis C.K. thing of you're just not interesting in your early 20s when you've done nothing, and then once you have now it may be emotional pornography or whatever, but she's more interesting now that she has an actual very true challenge or whatever right in front of her with what she did in a moment of weakness or whatever.
That's probably where we differ, because I don't find her interesting after that. I find her, she's just she's still it's hard to read her, it's hard to understand. I mean, I understand that we're supposed to believe her passion is in astronomy, and I guess that speech is supposed to show that.
The opening speech.
Well, that as well. But beyond that, like, I just really have trouble accepting her being an outcast. Like, she refers to herself as an ex-con, an outcast, working at this high school as a janitor, wearing like schlubby jacket and pants and a toque, and surrounding herself with Indian men, older Indian men, and trying to avoid people, but putting her in this situation where she's surrounded by teenagers, which makes no sense to me. And watching her walk around town aimlessly and with that horribly overdone score behind her, it's such an attempt to project something onto somebody who is not selling it at all to me. Like, she just looks like a pretty white girl to me that has really there's nothing to her, in my opinion. I don't get anything from her. I especially don't get anything from her relationship with the guy from Lost.
Are you saying that all pretty white girls have nothing to them?
No, I'm saying this one has nothing to her because she's poorly written.
Okay, I don't know. There's no way to respond. I feel like it either rubs you the right way or rubs you the wrong way for one reason or another. And every time you say the characters aren't interesting, their relationship isn't interesting, I don't know where that baffles me because I'm completely invested and interested in them. But while we're nitpicking something, let me say the part of the movie that I really can't stand and I think is terrible screenwriting and way too obvious is when they actually come together and have sex. That pisses me off because that felt like really just what can we do to make the final reveal when she finally tells him, how can we make that even more devastating? Oh, I know. We'll have them like start to fall in love and have sex. And that fucking grates on me to no end because you don't need that. It's already going to be horrible and terrible when she finally does tell him or when he finally figures it out. It's going to blow up. Why do we need this sex scene? And not only is the sex scene there, but right after it, when their version of pillow talk is him telling her all about how some kid killed his family. It just feels really lazy, shitty screenwriting right there. I hate that part of the movie.
You know why it needs a sex scene is because it is a movie of the week. It's a soap opera. It needs a sex scene. That's what these things do. They have sex scenes. They have people that.
Wow, if you're equating this to like a soapy melodrama, I mean it hides it really well. Then I can buy that. It's a very self-contained story with a very big backdrop, but I don't believe it has the cue the big 3 organ chords for the big reveals. It's not like they do things arbitrarily. Structurally way more than the characters do. So it's not like it's just out to constantly, give you the pleasure pill of something new and melodramatic happening. You're fully aware of the box of those characters and you're just watching sort of the specifics of it play out. That's the opposite of what I would consider a soap opera movie of the week to me.
I don't think it's a soap opera, but Andrew, I also don't think it's in the context of that. I think it's a huge mistake. Like I think it's clunky, and but you can sort of see the screenwriter saying like, well, she needs to do anything to make him feel good, and he needs to have some sort of permission to open up to her. So this will give us both things. Like I think there's this sense that this is going to do a lot of heavy lifting for us, but the whole script feels like that to me. So it's the whole thing is like, how are we going to get to the part where she sends him to the other Earth and then she meets herself?
Yeah, I don't really have a problem with that in movies, though. I don't have a problem with the fact that someone has mapped things out and I mean
when the execution's better, I don't have a problem with it. I just it's in this case I'm not. It's
a
funny,
device.
That's the one thing that stood out for you because I actually think it's serviceable in the sense of like accomplishing the idea, right?
I think it's a device that's unnecessary and not earned at all. Like I don't buy them as a relationship. I buy them as a friendship growing, and he takes her and plays music, and she thinks about like going into space and being an astronaut and all that stuff. And I can see them like having some sort of bond there, but then immediately going home and ripping each other's clothes off is just the only word I can think of is lame. I can't stand it.
Now, this film is not the director or the star who collaborated on making it. It's not their first film. Their first film was a documentary called Boxers and Ballerinas. IMDb. Oh, it does. Yeah, it's 1984, so it's a feature first film. Has anyone seen? It's like 2 Cubans and 2 Cuban Americans, all in a sort of documentary format.
Nope.
No one's seen this.
Nope.
But I guess what got me looking was that this does feel like a first film, and I guess I'm a bit more forgiving. I mean, it's a first film.
Yeah, but Bellflower's a first film, so
That's sounds like a good point as any to segue on into number 2, unless anyone else has anyone to say about Another Earth.
It's terrible.
Have we talked about the ending enough or at all? Did we mention?
Not really.
I think that's. I mean, Kurt said when he saw the ending, that was a pivotal moment that kind of just locked it up and said, "This is a good film." And I agree. I was liking the movie the whole way through. That final shot, I think, is kind of what blew me away, and I was not expecting it all. I thought that was great. And again, it's one of those all these possibilities that pop into my head, just sort of come to life all of a sudden. I don't know. What did you guys? You hate the movie. What did you think of the ending? Did it bring it up at all, or did you hate it even more?
I don't know. I don't really have any. You have to do a little bit of work to get anything out of the ending, and I'm completely unwilling to do any work for this film.
It seems like the movie that you would want, Jay, is for them to, okay, now the two people are together, have a conversation. What are these two going to talk about? Or me, I like she takes a step forward, fade to black.
The movie I would want is something more along the lines of Contact, or I would even be fine with the woman who directed Deep Impact, like a Deep Impact style movie.
A Mimi Leader reference, excellent.
Yes, Mimi Heater. I mean, there's always this sort of. I mean, there seems to be this idea that a drama will always be better than a genre film. Like the worst drama is still more holds more power or is more important than a great genre film. And to me, terrible drama is like one of the worst things ever in film. Like this is the reason I love documentaries, because I find that documentary does drama better than fiction, because a lot of time fiction just feels like dramatization, and this film feels like dramatization, and I don't buy it for a second. So I almost wish that they would push past the drama to the point where it's just entertainment. And because I don't buy the drama in this film, it drives me more towards the things happening in the background and frustrates me more when I don't get enough of it and I have to sit through the stuff in the foreground. So the ending really didn't do much for me other than say, all of that stuff that you were enjoying in the background, here's more of it, or here's like the tip of the iceberg of all of that stuff, but we're still not going to give you anything from it. We're just, and in terms of the character, I could care less.
It's I guess about as interesting as a Freedom 55 ad. I don't know if you have those, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I'm assuming that when she meets herself, the idea is, oh, the one that didn't run anyone over went to school and legitimately was the first person that got to go to Earth 1. And then she can go meet herself. So it's almost like, hello, I'm you, the successful version of you that's not damaged, right?
Mm-hmm.
But neither version is that interesting. So,
well, I think that's the easy explanation. The harder explanation would be that things that both looked up, both crashed the families, and one actually didn't give the other the dude the chance to go over there, and she's literally confronting the version of herself that still killed all those people, and now but wanted to just get away
over there only to find his other dead family. That is dark.
Well, no, she meets her at her own house, right?
No, but he's saying in your world, the girl still killed the whole family. She just didn't.
So she makes that huge sacrifice. She sends him to the other planet, and he gets there, and then they're dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, this is some. Oh, dude.
No, because again, you're focusing on the wrong character. That's collateral damage, if you will. But the more interesting thing is her literally confronting herself. And I don't think that necessarily that the person that she literally confronts at the end is the good MIT educated version.
I think they're suggesting it is because she's dressed well.
Well, that's okay.
They're suggesting that it is because they are implying that it's a kind of happy ending, like the way he gets on the waves to you on the TV and stuff. It's like, this is all going to be okay, everybody.
I don't understand that ending.
I don't get that at all when I watch the movie.
What happens when he goes to the other planet? Is it like My Two Dads, where suddenly there will be two of them and they have to share the same family?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He's
Why
not
doesn't it matter?
an important character.
Her entire arc is to deal with his sadness and make it better. It does matter, Kurt.
It doesn't matter to you, Kurt, because
fair enough. Because I look at the movie as her journey.
But her journey is to make him better. It matters.
That's her plan. But
so then her whole thing is pointless.
Well, it could be. I mean, you can't run away and just fix everything by doing something. He still killed all of her family. That doesn't make it go away. I mean, I think that's a relevant read of the movie. I mean, the movie is her working up the courage to confront yourself, and you could argue that even her giving up her ticket is another one of her dodges. I'm going to feel like I'm going to not engage. I'm going to be the person that stays behind. And now she literally confronts herself, the selfish version of herself, if you will.
You are overlaying an almost Nietzsche level of.
I know, and if Gamble was here, he'd say, "But it's all in her mind," which is
right. Exactly. No, it's in a snow globe on St. Elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that's I think in films like this, it allows for that possibility, and that's why I tend to like these films. I also have this whole thing with the Adjustment Bureau in that it's a deep, dark Philip K. Dick disturbing ending, and not the happy ending that the film kind of implies with its exit music. You can read dark things into these. What seems on the surface to be pleasant is actually just a dodge, and I like that. That's my Another Earth.
This is my first one of these, but let me just ask, Kurt, what did your parents do to you?
Yeah. they were so nice, and my childhood was so uneventful and pleasant that I now take pleasure in playing out horrible scenarios, and I can watch horrible movies because if some of these things really happened to me and I had real shit that went down, then I wouldn't want to watch these movies. There's your Psych 101 read.
Andrew, you really liked it. Who do you think is what's the read that you agree with more here?
Well, Kurt's look at it is interesting, but I do think the film, what it implies is what it is. So the girl that shows up from Earth 2 is the MIT educated. She never did smash into the car. She didn't kill the people. I think it is sort of a bright and rosy version of the story. That said, if it's the way Kurt said, I mean, then at least the guy goes to Earth 2. I just keep calling him Ethan. I can't remember his name. He goes to Earth 2, and at least his other self is there, and they can sort of
commiserate.
Yeah, they can comfort each other, or he can explain to her, look, the girl who killed, maybe he'll work it out psychologically with himself. This is all ifs, ands, or buts, but this is what I'm saying is kind of interesting about the ending, is there's lots of different possibilities. You can kind of make it up whatever you want.
The two Ethans will then team up, get all geared out, combat equipment or whatever, and then come back and take revenge on the two other girls.
All right, Kurt. We'll let you have your segue this time.
I would enjoy that.
I know you would. John Carpenter can direct, and everything will work out just okay.
Before we move on, I just want to mention a couple of my favorite moments in Another Earth.
Favorite not meaning favorite.
Right. First being when the girl is in her bedroom, sitting on her bed, staring at the dust particles in the light while backwards music plays. It's that moment. It's enough said about that moment. It's just wonderful, and the writing of "Forgive" on Kumar's hand as the tear falls down his cheek and she curls up beside him. Just a beautiful moment.
You have no heart, Jay. You have no heart.
I can't even like. Do you guys like that moment?
No. Well, as I said, I would be more than happy, satisfied if they just cut the Kumar character. If she just worked at the high school, like that was it. Like I do believe that the whole everything to do with Kumar is a unnecessary misstep by the film. It doesn't add to anything. It doesn't elaborate on anything. It's just, like you said, it's just treacly. It's just there.
Yeah,
and
it's a little bit
at
of
worst,
poetic
it's
wankery.
the magical black man kind of offensiveness to it as well. But
Yeah, I agree. But let me ask you this, just out of curiosity. Is forgive, that's what she writes on his hand?
I thought that's what it was. Maybe I misunderstood it.
she writes
No, I thought it was-
FOR and then it cuts away. So
Yeah, I thought maybe it was
you can
forgive.
get out the
She writes
dictionary
it-
and look at all the words.
There's a G. No, there's a G.
She either
so it's
writes
definitely
forgive
forget.
or forget.
Yeah, or forgot or something. I
Forget
don't know.
is even better.
Or
If it's
forgo.
forget-
We can play this game.
Yeah.
It's forge.
Forge. There you go. Perfect.
She's telling him to no.
All right, well, let's move on to Bellflower then. This was okay. Well, we'll just start going around. I had never seen the movie before. I just pulled it up on the Netflix this afternoon to check it out. The only thing I really know about it or knew about it beforehand was the trailer. Doesn't the trailer have a lot of all those slow motion shots of the car and a lot of flamethrower stuff? It just makes it look fucking awesome, that kind of movie. This is gonna be fucking cool. That's what I knew about it going in, except for I did listen to the Film Junk guys, whenever that podcast was, maybe about 8 months ago or whatever. You guys ripped it to shreds. I did listen to that, so I guess that's what I knew going in. I would say this movie is a giant shit sandwich. I fucking hate this movie. I don't hate it. It's not worth being hated. It's just dumb. Despicable characters doing stupid things, trying their hardest to become alcoholics, and there's nothing to them. You guys talk about nothing to the characters in Another Earth. Here's characters that are just literally just stupid. I hate everybody in this movie. Never would want to communicate with them. I would never want to hang out with them, other than to watch them blow some shit up once in a while. But other than that, like, every piece of communication between anybody in this movie is absolutely grating and horrific. That's my 2 cents.
I cannot believe that I'm going to have to defend this to all three of you.
Well, no, not to all three. I'm the anti-J in here, in that I'm in the love camp on all three. So
Okay, so I mean, all right. I couldn't, again, in the most objective way, I could not feel more completely opposite to you in my encounter with this film and the kind of intense connection that I felt to it. I absolutely loved that girl, was in love with her almost instantly.
Millie. Well, why don't you set the film up then, Matt?
So it's two guys that have a kind of unhealthy obsession with Mad Max, and specifically with Lord Humongous from sorry, my mind.
Road Warrior.
From Road Warrior, thank you. And try to build and recreate a whole bunch of the stuff from that movie, because in a facetious way they think, well, if the end of the world comes, we'll be in charge. And then one of them falls in love, and it kind of breaks the friendship, and then breaks him. And I, at the time, the important thing to remember is that there was no Instagram yet, so I had not seen a lot of photography like that either, which I also really found very engaging. And then, subsequent to seeing the movie, just learning about that team that put the film together, I liked the movie an immense amount, and it is one of those things, like another film that we were that I think was getting bandied about as possibly for this show, which was Naked Lunch. It's one of those things where I really strongly connected to the world of it, and felt really drawn in by the characters. And there's a moment sort of late in the film when he really goes fucking crazy. That is I really liked it. But then afterwards, finding out that they not only built all the cars and the flamethrowers and all the shit that's in the movie, but then they actually built a camera to get the effect they wanted to get, and kind of just that sort of weird, wonky engineering side of that film, I think really appeals to me as well. And I really like the performances. I really think they're good.
Well, for me, this was the film I missed at every film festival. I had 3 kicks at it, and I missed it every time. So I ended up seeing it in regular release, in the very limited regular release that it got. And so I came into it. There was there wasn't a ton of vitriol leveled at the film. The film had a lot of darling wrapped around it. It was in that phase where it had turned a lot of heads. So I had a lot of hype. I know I was at Action Fest with Matt. I had to leave a day early, and I remember talking about you guys afterwards, and because both of you guys really loved that film at the end of the film festival. I'm like, dang, I missed that one. And then when I came to it, it wasn't a film that I loved immediately on first choice. I have a love-hate thing with the photography in that movie. I find it incredibly interesting. I do like that sort of tilt focus kind of weirdness and super high contrast yellow, but I found it quite inconsistent. It was just inconsistent when I watched it. And then watching it again for this podcast, none of the inconsistencies bothered me, and I think a lot more of the elements of the film completely came together for me. And my first read was just, well, these are boys that love toys, and they're incapable of having a mature relationship other than with themselves, and they're just better off, at the end of the film, with themselves off in their own little desert. But I just felt I got a lot more out of the film, both structurally. I never quite got the sort of fantasy or brain damage sequence and how it all aligned the first time, and I was just a little bit just held back. Then this time I really got the idea that it's his post-apocalyptic fantasy is not really all that it's cracked up to be, and he does actually level himself back down, and I kind of like that, and I don't think it's as douchey as the film can come off to some people. So as it stands right now, I quite love Bellflower as well.
The only things I like about Bellflower are the moments where they're blowing things up, or making flamethrowers, or souping up their car. But if I want to watch 2 guys with weird facial hair construct items of destruction for fun, I'd rather just watch Mythbusters. That's it.
Or Death
And
Race.
scene.
Okay, let me start here then, Matt Price. Let me just make sure we're on the same page here. You instantly fell in love with the girl whose character introduction is she stands up in a bar and says, "Yeah, what's up, motherfucker? I'll take it on," and goes up and just relishes eating handfuls of crickets. This is the girl you fell in love with instantly.
Yep. Absolutely. I thought she was really good and very charming and great. Yes. I really liked her.
See, it's funny for me, I think the actress is good, but I find her as a human being is a bit of a projection. I find the girls get really short shrift in this movie. It is a movie about the boy.
I totally buy that he falls in love and then totally obsesses over her. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. I don't buy that for a second, but I also believe that character is is also a fantasy of the directors as well. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I'm in a way, it's to his credit that he has it melt down and says, you know what, maybe that wasn't going to work. I find his initial way of reacting, and then the film kind of like Another Earth and like Mr. Nobody postulates a couple different options and lets them play out, and I kind of dug the way they did that.
The only way I can describe my inability to connect with the characters and how the characters alienate me, I think is to say if it would be like someone telling me to sit down and watch Hannah Montana and attempt to connect with those characters. It felt like I was watching children that I have no interest in watching, and watching them talk like children and act like children, and not even real children. They just are so uninteresting. And the girl is the complete opposite for me. I find her vile and wretched.
Agreed. I find all of the characters vile and wretched. Like, at any point in the movie, are they not downing bottles of whiskey or just pounding beers? The guy's got a whiskey tap in his car. Instantly, you're a fuck. I hate you.
I don't think it's.
Really, I enjoyed that immensely.
I don't think it's unreasonable to say that there are plenty of people that get to be children well into their 20s and 30s nowadays. I don't think that's. I understand that, your hesitation to necessarily spend time with them, but I look at this movie as an interesting, a different take on the whole man-child thing. Like, I mean, them building flamethrowers and shooting shotguns at propane tanks, that's who they are. And then you get later on when, real shit happens to them with the girls, both girls actually, because the other girl ends up gravitating to him, and the other guy was kind of wooing her, and the whole thing. And then they've got these aggressive toys lying around, so they've got to use them. And I kind of like the way the movie sort of straps that on and runs with it.
But it just takes forever to get to that point? Like for 90 minutes. Well, it's not 90 minutes, but it felt like 90 minutes.
It is over 90. It's an hour 40.
Okay, so yeah, but up until the point where they actually use all the stuff that they've built, it's just what's interesting? Nothing. They drive to Texas and it's a relationship blossoming just like any other relationship might blossom. They have fights, somebody's fucking somebody else. It's like when you talk about soap opera, this is like soap opera with a bunch of fuck shit thrown in.
But you contrast that to the relationship that they have. Like, actually, I find the Aiden character to be really fascinating because he's kind of an asshole, but he is, like their little relationship, he's kind of quite nurturing. He even doesn't even get into a row about, like, he mentions it to him, but he doesn't, like, tear him a new one for, A, running off with the other girl, or B, fucking around or not even acknowledging that he had a relationship with the second girl. I
he's
think basically
he's Vince Vaughn to Jon Favreau in Swingers, only with zero charisma and not funny.
Yeah, I don't see what's interesting about that. What's fascinating about those characters is
I don't even see what's original about that.
Yeah, I don't think that
the events are original, but I think the execution on that is definitely stuff I haven't seen before. And I think as opposed to something that just takes a long time to quote unquote get somewhere, that movie to me just builds towards something in a really beautiful way. Like when he tattoos that fucking beard on himself, I'm like, okay, here we go. Like it works for me pretty much 100%.
I will talk about this. You mentioned it when you were talking about it, Matt, is the photography and the look of the whole thing. For the most part, I actually did enjoy everything from a craft standpoint. I did like looking at this. It feels like a little bit of a way to cover up, your budget limitations. But I thought it was a pretty interesting look. There were scenes that were jarring. When they first buy that motorcycle, maybe I just hadn't noticed it before, but that scene in particular, there's a camera that's very dirty. I don't know if that meant something, but then they cut to another camera from another angle, same scene, and it's totally clean, and then they cut back, and it's back to that dirty cam again. I don't really have an opinion, hate or love either way. It was very noticeable, very jarring, and I wasn't sure what the point was there because it was weird.
Well, I think I noticed that as well, and I don't know if it's intentional or not. What I think that is they're using like a lens adapter, a 35 millimeter lens adapter, and there's ground glass in the lens adapter that the image is kind of projected onto, and normally you're supposed to turn on like a little motor that vibrates that glass to get rid of that dirt. It's not actually dirt, I don't think, but it's just like the grain and texture of that ground glass, and they just didn't turn on the motor. I don't know if that's like a aesthetic choice or what, but I've actually found that kind of interesting and embracing that. But other than that, I wasn't a fan of the cinematography in the film.
I think it just works for me, again, it just works to support where they're going with the characters. There is this, I'm not even sure I can necessarily put it into like really specific words, but I think there's this tangible sense for me of like a relationship between that highly almost warped way of looking at things and what's happening to them.
Yeah, well, there's a scene, I think it's fairly early on in the movie, when they're actually two couples, and they spend like a day at the beach, and it's shot very, it's very tactile the way that it's shot. You feel the warmth or whatever, and it's the only really like where all four of them are happy, and then you cut to the end of the movie, and I think the Aiden character says to the main character, why are we even here? Like, we don't even go to the beach anymore, and whatever. And I think that kind of gets at the idea of they have this picture of moving from Wisconsin to LA to do whatever, and they may hit it for a very brief period of time, but then it kind of latches on to we're not settling down here, we're going to move on. And I think that's a realistic, that's what your 20s are for. I mean, that's, you kind of go in and you experiment with things and you fool around a bit and maybe learn some lessons and move on. And I really think that's kind of what the movie distills out. I mean, it does get at, and I guess the big debate with this movie is it a celebration of the boy kind of like, making cool stuff and having these weird road warrior fantasies and we're going to kick ass and are we cool doing this? Because the one character's always going, yeah, we're cool, right? We're cool. Or is it just a satire of those things? And I think it's far more a satire than an earnest thing. I think that the writer, director, star, whatever, picks at that. He's very critical of, even, maybe his own, 20s or whatever. And I think that's, I love the way the two characters are constantly second guessing themselves, and then they just fly off into a rage. Like the fights that they get into are, either like him trying to prove to her like the knight in shining armor when her ass gets slapped by the truck driver, or these just randomly impulsive party fights, which is real. I mean, I know tons of people that do shit like that. That's why there was with all of its posturing and over style and everything, that there was an element of veracity to the core of this movie, which I bought into, and that certainly endeared it to me.
It's funny talking about Instagram with this movie, because it does feel almost like a film version of Instagram, in that the director is, this amateur engineer and creating these flamethrowers and cars and all of these crazy gadgets, and it feels like the film is simply an excuse to show that stuff off. And everything surrounding that stuff is just, at least for me, didn't matter at all. The whole project feels kind of narcissistic.
Well, see, I completely disagree on that because I think it's these two characters that have this fantasy vision of like a pure apocalypse, and when it does happen in the brain damage sequence, and you literally have everything just melt down. It's not like the character. He may look badass for a minute, but it doesn't happen. Then he goes off and he looks at the box of Millie's shit, and deals with it in a much. Like he does not embrace the apocalypse. They quietly drift off into the night. They don't go out like Humongous and drive into the tanker truck.
I also think it's probably a bit unfair to them to somehow say that. I mean, it seems it's a bit like you're saying they're kind of mercenary. Like, hey, we can build cool shit. Fuck, we have to make a story that goes with it. Oh, well. Like, I actually don't think that, at least in terms of their intent, I don't think that's true at all. I think they care just as much about trying to tell this story. I think the fact that they can invent this stuff to help them tell it is just part of their process. I don't read it like a cynical, like that they're, hey, we built cool cars. Let's, we got to make a movie about it.
And I would be fine with that. Like, I kind of agree with you that maybe this is a story they wanted to tell, but the story is just, it's boy meets girl, girl hurts boy movie that we've seen 1 billion times.
Then it goes back
but not like this.
It goes back to the old thing. It's not the story, it's how you go about it.
If anything,
they're very much on going about it.
Andrew, if anything, it's a commentary on how banal those stories normally are, because it pushes out so much further.
It just makes it angrier and more aggressive. I agree with that, but that doesn't make me really care.
No, it doesn't necessarily. It also makes it more simpering, because I do believe that the ending is a quiet, oh, we're not going to do that. We're going to fantasize about that, but we're not actually going to do that.
Yeah, so honestly, I would have hated that movie more than you if they hadn't pulled that back. Like they
right. I agree. I
think they win on that level
by self-deprecate, or like by almost satire. I agree completely. If this was just we're going to get worse and worse and worse, then yeah.
No, the worst device for me ever in a film is like, oh, you know what? Let's not go to town. It's crazy there. Like that thing where they do a whole sequence and then go, that didn't really happen. But in this case, I think they totally earn it. Like I really, I think, as you said, Kurt, like I think it's exceptionally kind of like a hopeful pull.
I got nothing.
All right.
It's not worth it to me. That's why I said in the beginning, like, I don't even hate it because I don't feel like it's worthy of my hate. I won't.
Well, I also like, I mean, it may be simplistic, but again, I've not seen it in very many films, but to use flames and devices to create fire as a, overarching metaphor for unfocused rage. I mean, I'm sure it's far from the first time it's been done, but it is done in such a unusual and quite pretty way in the movie. And I think that the people who did, I'm sure they did their own or whatever their own poster artwork. When you have the main character and Millie kissing in front of the car, in front of the big mushroom cloud of flame in the background, it succinctly gives you the flavor of what the movie's going for. I like that a lot. I dug all of the like ancillary stuff around this movie and how it ties the room together, so to speak.
All right. Anybody else? Any last words on the Bellflower?
How would you plan on ever watching it again, Jay, now that we've forced you through it a second time? You feel it's...
No, I actually watched it on 1.5 speed to get through it faster.
Did you watch it the first time all the way through, or did you stop and go, and then come back to it, or did you just...
I watched it all the way through the first time. I really like the stuff with the car, and I love the shot of the shooting the propane tank.
Yep.
But I guess it's similar to Another Earth for me, where those little peaks kind of are more interesting than what is supposed to be in the foreground of this film. And I just find the actual story, again, to be really middle of the road. And wherever the film does show promise, it's not enough, and it's a disappointment whenever it gets away from that promise. And all the stuff with the Lord Humongous and the Mad Max references, that stuff really annoys me. I mean, that's to me is the definition of pandering.
Well,
you strip away all of those little things, you would have a story that is completely ordinary.
Well, I would never use the word pandering because I still don't know what the obvious audience for this movie is. It seems to be it seems to do a lot of things to upset audience with expectation rather than pander to them.
The audience is cinephiles. Who else would it be? I mean, they're not making Bellflower for the multiplex. They're making Bellflower for people who go to strange movies and would probably get off on a reference to Mad Max.
Yes, I don't know. I would actually far more buy that they just made it for themselves. Like I mean I don't really. I wonder whether they really sat around and go, okay, now who's going to watch this movie now that we've made it?
Yeah, but Jay, what are you saying that so they made it for cinephiles. So I am a cinephile, and I actually really dug the fact that it references this other thing in what I thought was, at least for me, a very clever way. So is that somehow that makes me it seems directed and not necessarily at me, but the idea that cinephiles are somehow not that's like a kind of a wankery and not really a good way to engage with movies.
That sorry, repeat that. That cinephiles.
That being a cinephile or sort of trying to get into films in a more referential way where you have a sort of big body of knowledge and that helps you to sort of color your opinion of stuff. That that you're kind of wanking on it? Is that what are you saying about that? I don't really.
I'm saying that the reference is completely shallow. There's nothing behind the reference other than it being a reference for a certain group of people to pick up on. And that's the worst kind of reference for me. It adds nothing to the film, in my opinion.
It does seem logical, though, that guys that sit around and build muscle cars would like the Road Warrior.
Sure.
Plus, I think just on the level of sort of the movie confronting a kind of apocalyptic end for itself, I think there is thematic strength.
Yeah. Well, what is an apocalypse and being the kick-ass leader during that apocalypse, and preparing it before there's any sign of it happening, but just being almost, a narcissistic doomer. I mean, I think that's relevant.
I got nothing else.
All right.
I just wanted to end on a weird, little personal aside. Is that that car that they build is a modified 1972 Buick Skylark, which is the car that my 4'11" mother used to drive us to school in when we were kids.
With the flames and everything?
No, with the flames. It was green with a white vinyl roof, but I do remember that car had my father did have the air rams in the front, the air intakes in the hood put into it. That car passed everything but the gas station. It was a powerful car that my mother used to truck us back and forth to school in. I remember the first time I watched Bellflower, I'm like, I kind of recognize the car. It's yellow when they first get it, and then they soup it up. And then when I was reading some piece about the movie, and they said the make and the model of the car, I phoned up my dad, and I'm like, what was the car that? And it was the exact same year, exact same car. It was kind of funny.
Nice. Our final film that we're going to talk about is Mr. Nobody. I think it's a very unknown film. I don't know too many people that have even heard of it or saw it. It didn't get, as far as I know, it didn't get any sort of wide or any theatrical viewing. I saw it at TIFF in 2009.
It played 1 week in Canada, and it played all over Europe. If you go to the IMDb and click external reviews, it's normally all the usual film blogger websites and whatnot. It's all Dutch, German, British, and French links in there. So it was financed by French money with some French-Canadian money, and I think it played predominantly, even though the film's in English, it predominantly played in Europe. But it did play for 1 week. It opened against Inception.
I remember that.
Canada, E1 put it out. It's for a $50 million film in English. It's kind of unusual that it never got a release really of any kind domestically.
Okay, so an attempt at a synopsis is really difficult, but I will read the one that I wrote for Row 3 back in 2009. So here's what I wrote. The film starts in the future of 2092. The oldest man in the world, Nemo Nobody, has captured the attention of the world as the last man that will ever die of old age since automatic cell regeneration has been achieved. Nemo sits in a hospital of sorts and recounts his life. Blah, blah. The tale weaved starts before Nemo's birth as he tells the process a soul goes through before choosing its parents. The story then moves through adolescence and into manhood, but in a non-linear fashion. We see several versions of Nemo's life had he made one choice over another, and we move back and forth in time to get different perspectives of different events and indeed different and sometimes interesting lifetimes. Not the easiest of plots. If you were to combine Vanilla Sky with Sliding Doors, you have a rough idea the style in which the narrative is told. Some elements of other influences would be Slaughterhouse-5, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, 2001: A Space Odyssey, with a little bit of Amelie. Throw it in for good measures. So that's about the best synopsis I could come up with for this movie. And like I said, I saw it in the theater in 2009 in TIFF, and I was totally blown away. 5 stars. I fucking love this movie. I was trying to tell everybody about it. I watched it again maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember how I got a hold of a copy, but I got a hold of a copy a couple years ago and watched it, and I still liked it. I was a little less interested in it the second time. But, still enjoyable. And then I watched it again today, courtesy of a Blu-ray procured from Mr. J. Cheel. And I'm less and less interested in the movie as it goes along, and I'm almost more confused. Upon further rewatches, like all the different what's happening, I care less about, so I'm not paying as much attention anymore. I still love it visually, and a couple of the performances are outstanding. But just overall, I'm not as enthralled and in love with it as I used to be. I still like it. I will defend it, and I would tell a lot of people to go check it out, but I'm not as in love with it as I once was. Matthew?
I do think that... So I did not see it at TIFF, and I would have, because you guys were certainly very convincing, but it just came too late in the schedule that year, so I think by the time you got to me, it had already played out and I wasn't able to. So I rented it and saw it on Blu-ray about a year ago, and I think I feel around how you felt after the second viewing. I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's really accomplished. It, in a weird way, it kind of reminds me of a David Bowie album. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of there's a lot of style there. There's a lot of, and not in a vapid way, but there's a lot of really confident sort of telling of this really complicated story. But it also, to some extent, the minute I finished watching it all kind of melted away from me. I have a really hard time just remembering specific... I remember kind of the overarching stuff, but I don't remember even specific scenes. Because I feel like the movie kind of just... It's got this weird repetitive nature, and it kind of just ebbs away from you in a way.
I think I was sitting with you at that screening at TIFF. So that was my first viewing. Then on its 1 week theatrical release in Canada, I went to see it by myself, and I was in the cinema by myself. So the only person seeing it on a Saturday night on opening weekend was the person who had already seen it at a festival. I mean, they didn't advertise it or anything, whatever. And I've watched it probably 2 or 3 times on DVD. And just a couple days ago, I watched it again. And my interest or love in this movie doesn't ebb in the slightest. I love it. In a way, it diminished Cloud Atlas completely for me, because I feel this movie, if you take out the racial element that Cloud Atlas has, it has a lot of the same editing and structural things going on. It's just they're all with the same guy instead of with like a tableau of characters. But and I love it as an editing exercise. I think it's fascinating that you have a story like in a way kind of like a Donnie Darko kind of story that has a tangent universe, except it's got many tangents, and then some of the stories that it's telling you are fiction that the character is writing inside some of those lives. So just as a marvel of a constructed like a Chinese finger puzzle or the nested Russian dolls, I like it. And I happen to dig on the sort of layman Scientific American or popular science kind of idea of string theory and adapting that to life in the way that they do with the randomness and the various things. I quite love. And the final ending, the concept of time at the end, which I believe that this is the one really original idea that it integrates into the film, I quite love the point where the universe stops expanding and starts to contract, and what does that actually mean? And then linking it to how you make a final choice. Like you make a singular choice as opposed to this, it's at the beginning of the day and you have all your choices in front of you and everything is rosy because you haven't committed to anything. I love that as a movie. I mean, I know I can see many of the flaws in the movie. I don't think all the performances are perfect. And some of the things that it goes off, it's a bloated movie, but I think it's a marvel that it exists, and it's a movie I come back to often.
This one out of the 3 was the toughest to revisit simply because it's so long. It's way too long. And I mean, the idea of watching these 3 movies again and discussing them on this podcast actually feels like I'm enjoying doing this, but it feels a lot like a chore. And
and we thank you for choring.
But I mean, it was partially my idea. I mean, I thought, revisiting these films and, really talking through them would be a lot of fun. And I'm not saying I'm not having fun, but it does feel like a chore because I really have no connection to these movies at all. And to attempt to, for a second time, work up any sort of passion either in the negative or positive realm is really challenging. So, I mean, it was my second time seeing it. Watched a lot of it on 1.5 speed again,
which is weird because a lot of the movie is sped up in and of itself.
Yeah, and I normally would never do that. But it was partially because of the time crunch getting the films in, and because I'd seen them already. But yeah,
and you gave me your DVD, so
right, I gave you the Blu-ray, so I was kind of stuck there. But the movie, one of the opening lines of the movie is, "What did I do to deserve this?" And that's exactly how I felt getting back into Mr. Nobody. It's just one of those. I'm not huge on puzzle films. Like they just, I don't know, they don't really do much for me. I'm not the biggest Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind fan. I'm not a big Donnie Darko fan. So immediately, I'm not naturally engaged in Mr. Nobody. And what makes it even harder is the performances, Jared Leto being a huge part of this movie. And the fact that he really, at least for me, he is not Nemo Nobody in this movie. He's Jared Leto with a bunch of bad wigs. Like, I do not know this character at all. The concept dominates any story or character, or the aesthetic dominates everything. The director's inability to decide, with that being a theme of the film, that as long as you don't have to choose, everything remains possible. That seems to be the mantra that this director went into this film with. He does everything and anything. It's just such a desperate attempt to please or to impress aesthetically. And overall, it's just really, I feel it's really self-indulgent and undisciplined. And there are some good ideas in it, but they're completely washed away by the fact that the film's bloated and unfocused and gaudy and unoriginal in many ways. And it boils down its interesting ideas to these PowerPoint presentations that visually make me want to retch. Like, they remind me of YouTube videos with the scrolling text that moves around, and it just visually, it's completely uninspired. And the fact that it's because of the concept, it's so repetitive, having to replay pieces of music and scenes over and over again, makes it that much harder to remain engaged with the film if you're not immediately drawn to it. So that's a big challenge for someone like me, who doesn't like the film. And comparing it to, other big idea science fiction films, the best way I can kind of sum up Mr. Nobody is Mr. Nobody is kind of like the self-indulgent Neil Peart 20-minute drum solo to Stanley Kubrick's 2001 and its perfect, simple 4/4 rhythm. And I would much prefer the perfect, simple 4/4 rhythm to this mess.
Well, actually, it's 3/3 because of the waltz, but you're
fair enough.
Correct. I think this feels like a cover album version of those better movies, right?
Yeah.
So he's just, I like those movies. I'm going to try to, but he just doesn't have the gravitas to kind of pull it off. So in a sense, it just like washes over you, and then. But I totally get how in a film festival setting, this would be the shit. You can totally see how in a hothouse environment where you're seeing a lot of films and you're in this insular way. Like, this is one of those movies that I think is designed for festivals to get people thinking it's better than it is.
I definitely think seeing it on the big screen helps a lot, because there's a lot of big epic scenes. I kind of disagree with Jay in that visually I think this movie's gorgeous. I love the crispness of how everything looks, and the color, and the big ideas kind of pop out at the screen. I love all that stuff. So even Blu-ray on a fairly large TV, it's not the same as it was. Seeing those big space stations blow up and asteroid collapses and a giant futuristic city, it was really big and grand on the huge screen, and I think that definitely adds something to this movie. Whether it's in a festival or not, I don't know. I feel like there were very few people in my screening, even at TIFF.
Yeah, but I've certainly had this with films. I think you're in a certain headspace. I think the big screen and the good sound, that is all part of it. But it's also this sense of being, like you're discovering things. And so you're kind of predisposed. If something starts to strike you the right way, that at least for me, you kind of get a little more excited. Like, maybe I'm really finding something here. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, you know, in something like TIFF, you're, like you said, exploring. A lot of them are little sort of stuffy foreign, like little quiet dramas or documentaries or stuff. There aren't many big, like, sci-fi films that you do feel like you're in discovery mode. Anything you discover is usually some weird little quirky thing or something that's going to be a huge hit, wide release anyway. There's never anything in a festival, I shouldn't say never, but in generally, at least in my experience, there's never anything really big and grand like this that hits you in the face quite the way Mr. Nobody would in a festival.
I'm sure it's exactly the reason, or certainly a big part of the reason why I have that very favorable reaction to Bellflower. I saw it in a festival when I had no expectations, and we were first, right? Like, I think it had played one other place.
Yep, fair enough.
For me, I have this, I don't know, it's not an obsession, but I do have this, I take pleasure in these sort of greatest hits type movies that draw from a lot of other movie resources. I mean, you could say draw, you could say steal, you could say a lot of things. That it does come down to how it's used, right? I mean, a lot of people accuse Quentin Tarantino of just flat out stealing. I like what he does with this, and I hold this movie with the universe and time thing at the end, that it does something new, even if a lot of the language and disparate parts are assembled out of other things. But I also look at it in exactly the same way that I looked at both of Richard Kelly's movies. Ironically, I think it was the second last one of these that we did was on Southland Tales, and I tend to like these. Let's just like grab at a bunch of different things, and maybe someone will watch this movie and say, "Oh, I want to pursue string theory." You know, it's the Starship Troopers thing. Like, would you like to know more? And these movies that put it up in a big sort of colorful package, they're very endearing to me, and I found this is like a big bowl of candy for me when I watch it, and I just like to stuff all of it in my face. And I must admit, I don't watch it often, but every time I come back, it's like, oh yeah, I like this type of candy, and I eat it up now, and I still am trying to rationalize in my brain why, when I saw Cloud Atlas, and that's why this was part of the original pairing with this, when I saw Cloud Atlas, why that movie did not endear to me in any way, because it should be the same sort of catnip that just makes me giddy when I watch.
Kurt, if it helps, I think it's because we all think you're wrong.
I must admit, I like a cause, but I mean, there's nothing stopping me from liking a Toy Story 3, which everyone else likes too. So it's not completely driven by a desire to just be that guy.
I don't know why you didn't connect to Cloud Atlas. As you say, it seems like it's right up your alley.
I know.
Well, with this one, I mean, Jay was talking about how it's kind of a mess and just way too many ideas, and I can buy that argument. I can see why somebody would just be lost and not feel like it's cohesive at all. But I don't know. I think one of the things that I do like about it is I'm watching this and marveling at it should be way more of a mess than it is. Like it should be absolutely making no sense. You should be completely lost. Whereas I think the way the editing is done and all the transitions, and sure, it's sort of, I don't know about ambiguous, but it is. If you're not really paying attention, even if you are really paying attention, it might lose you. But I still feel like even if you're lost, there's a sense of flow to everything. I think it just moves really well when you're moving from one Nemo to the other. Even if you don't understand why, at least it feels graceful to me.
Well, and here's the weird thing: if you watch all the way to the end credits, there's actually a segment in the credits where the director thanks all the people and stories that he cut out. So this, in my mind, after I watched Mr. Nobody, I felt that they must have storyboarded the living shit out of this movie and had it all worked out. But judging from that segment of the credits and all the names that they list that were cut out, and a couple characters you can kind of get glimpses of inside of the film, that like the homeless lady in the train station, that were other stories that are now no longer in the main story, that this movie was still found in the editing room, and like you said, it does have flow, but I do think that they probably spent a lot of time trying to figure out, what have we done, what do we have here,
which is partly kind of what I marvel about it. Like, I like the fact that after you get all this stuff shot, you got to assemble it somehow, and I don't know, I think a lot of people would just throw up their hands and say, this is not doable, we can't do this. And I don't know. I think they pieced it together really well.
Well, for 50 million euros, you find a way.
I think a film like this is far more forgiving in terms of assembling and editing it, because the concept allows for a lot of leg room in terms of,
I suppose.
Following it. Like, it's flashy. That's exactly what it is. Like, it seems like something that would take a lot of work to edit, but I would argue that a film like Amour is probably a much harder film to edit and sustain interest in. Like this, you play Buddy Holly's every day, every time you have a scene that you want to remind the audience about and connect it. I mean, it's not that hard. And anything else that slips you by, you just kind of allow to be that mysterious element that people like Kurt will eventually figure out or apply some meaning to.
But that's the beauty of that. What you just said is that's kind of one of the key themes in the movie is the idea that the object ends up what it is because of that series of choices, and that's what it is.
But I think, Jay, I think you're right. Like, I think there's any number of alternate cuts of that film that would play almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
There's any number of ways to reorder those scenes. And I think you wind up with pretty much the same movie.
Maybe they should have released all the footage like Bruce McDonald's Tracy fragments and allowed everyone with all the elements to cut their own films.
Well, no, but like if you contrast that with something like Synecdoche, New York, right? There's no alternate way to put those scenes together, and they're equally sort of fragmented.
Well, I'm certainly not going to argue with you that Synecdoche, New York is not a 10 times better film than this, because it most certainly is. But I don't think that necessarily diminishes the film that they have here. Even if there was a bunch of different ways to put it together, that doesn't necessarily diminish the film.
I think it only diminishes it for me because I was sort of a little bit aware of that while I was watching it. And I think it lends itself to, again, just for me, a kind of forgettable quality to it, right? Where doesn't last in your mind.
I also would argue that, I mean, the comparison to Southland Tales is kind of it seems like an obvious one, but to me, Southland Tales is not going out of its way at all to please the audience. I think Mr. Nobody is going far out of its way to
maybe the right connection is the box then.
Yeah, maybe that's probably a little better
on the Richard Kelly.
I think saying that Southland Tales does not please its audience may be the understatement of the year. But
But I mean, the thing with this film is it attempts to do so much, and I really get a sense that I think it takes itself way too seriously, not in tone. Like its tone is kind of all over the place, but in its craft and what it feels like it's bringing to the table. There are so many shots in this that are just direct lifts from other movies that are similar in nature. And I've talked about this before, and it seems like kind of a shallow criticism or observation, but I do think that it is important because it's a film that exists within the same conversation as these other ones, and it's just pulling directly. Like there's the shot of the fast motion as the camera's tracking along the room that is basically a direct lift from Requiem for a Dream, and the shot of the water drop falling from the sky, which immediately brings the frog to mind from Magnolia, and even the way that they assemble these micro stories of, you know, this piece of eggshell ended up in this waffle, which created this, and this, which feels like the first 5 minutes of Magnolia extended beyond an appropriate length. That 5 minutes in Magnolia works because it's 5 minutes or however long it is and doesn't run through the entire film. And that stuff for me stands out immediately. Like, I'm getting a movie that feels completely unoriginal. I aesthetically and thematically can go to a number of movies immediately and say, this did it better, that did it better, that did it better, and this movie's 2.5 hours long.
That's exactly. It's funny. Gonna keep coming back to this, but that's practically my review of Cloud Atlas, which I find hilarious. And you're right. I mean, if there's one set of filmmakers that I believe that the Jaco van Dormael, the director here, is riffing on is the Wachowskis. Like he does a lot of things that the Wachowskis does outside of the fascination with the sort of comic book kind of things. And I find it's fascinating that this movie anticipates by roughly 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, Cloud Atlas. It's just a weird one of these weird little things.
But I mean, even the music choices, some of them feel like, you know, a more disciplined filmmaker might resist the urge to
use that.
Whereas
the Polynesian choral music from the Thin Red Line, and which is in the
It's My Mind, which is, you know,
from Fight Club, the Pixie song,
but clearly owned by Fight Club. And Fight Club,
well, Jared Leto is often cast by David Fincher.
Fight Club, and Fight Club, I think, kind of exists within the same conversation, can kind of exist in the same conversation. And the fact that the filmmaker doesn't resist that urge and decides to go with that song anyways, it feels, again, like a shallow criticism, but it says a lot, I think, about the filmmaker, that there's a desperation to please, or a desperation to not a desperation, but he wants to emulate these other films that are inspiring him almost too directly. And there are filmmakers that can pull that off. And I do realize that when you dislike a film, you're more willing to nitpick that stuff, like the Lord Humongous thing. I mean, it's not that big of a problem, but because I don't like Bellflower, that stands out as something that annoys me. But, you know, Tarantino can reference whatever films he references, and I'm fine with it because everything else is awesome. And with Mr. Nobody, everything else is certainly not awesome. And so all of this stuff really stands to me as being kind of hackneyed. It's really, if you know, it's like a stand-up comedian stealing someone else's jokes. And in this particular case, really feels like it's a hack move.
Well, it's a hack move because he's wholeheartedly taking from everywhere, or because he just likes Fight Club?
Well, he's wholeheartedly taking from everywhere within the realm, the space that he's working in. I mean, it's not even like he's taking from a movie that's completely, like, you know, he's making Mr. Nobody and he steals something from Ishtar. Like, they're movies that are very similar to the film that he's making. And for a movie that is so jam-packed with ideas and different aesthetics and tones and whatnot, it starts to feel like I'm going to grab everything and throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And a majority of that stuff that I'm throwing at the wall, I took from other films, but I'm just repackaging it in this film. And I don't know if he's hoping no one notices or what, or maybe I'm overstating this as some sort of crime against cinema or something, but it just feels to me like it demands.
Well, I mean, I certainly do not have issues with Brian De Palma wholeheartedly stealing from Hitchcock and playing in the same space as Hitchcock. I don't have a huge problem. So yeah, okay, there's a lot of Fincher stuff in here. There's Wachowski stuff. There's Richard Kelly stuff. Whatever. I don't see that as a big problem. I don't. Yeah, okay, the movie's somewhat pandering in that sense, and I don't think it makes any bones about that. I mean, I don't know if this is a fair statement to let him off the hook of this or not, but I mean, he doesn't work. He's not working in the Hollywood system. It's a European film that he's making, and
makes it
so he's doing his own thing, you know.
I don't think he's a hack. I think it's more like the Peter principle at work. Like, he just feels like somebody that rose to the, slightly above his level of competence. So his ideas are okay. They're just not, there's not enough of them. He reminds me of people I knew in high school that wanted to talk about, like make these theoretical arguments about physics and stuff. They don't really know what they're talking about.
Right.
So
they're just using the analogies.
they're kind of out of their depth. And he just, I think, again, it's like he's coming from the right place, but he's just not quite in his element there, right?
Whereas, while I don't put this as the most original piece of science fiction ever made, I draw like those things don't. They're not a deal breaker for me. I draw so much pleasure from the construction of this object. The fact that the object reminds me a lot of other objects is not a. It's not a deal breaker, I guess.
Well, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I listened to the Cinecast. It almost seems for you a lot of times it's a deal sealer.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I go on and on about certain movies that pander in certain ways, but I must admit I have my pander points as well.
If a film references Kubrick or any of these hot spots that for you, I think
I sit up and take notice.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not the only issue with Mr. Nobody for me. Like, I would probably be able to look past that as well if everything else was working for me. But it just, I think that the concept just dominates everything else, and the characters and the story and everything that I just cannot get on board with the film from that perspective. And I don't think it has to be as long as it is or as overly complicated as it is. It's trying way too hard to be clever and to please, and I see that written all over the film. And
well, there's a certain type of film, though, when you start going down that road, you cross out of, okay, this isn't too complicated, but then you go so much further, and then it becomes pleasurable because it's just gotten so complicated and so whatever, and there's so many pieces that it becomes fun because it's pushed so far beyond the line of what's reasonable that itself becomes a source of pleasure. I mean, that's the same way I enjoy Southland Tales.
Probably get on board with that if it wasn't so repetitive. I mean,
yeah, if it wasn't, so desperate to borrow from other sources,
treading its own tracks over and over again. I mean, Synecdoche, New York is better and better every time I watch it, and it's a complicated film, but it's got a great story behind it. It's got characters that you actually care about and can empathize with, and its complications are interesting, both visually and thematically. And this movie is just complicating things for the sake of complicating things because it's in line with its mandate. Like it's about this sort of dream within a dream within a dream kind of thing. So it has to complicate things.
Well, no, I would argue that Mr. Nobody does address the idea of what we consider to be important things that or important choices that you made are as much connected to chemistry and the way the body is built up, or random forces, just random pockets of entropy or whatever as it is as this sort of self-centered personal narrative, and I like the way. In fact, all three of these films all address that, and I like the way that is addressed. I mean, people tend to think that, well, if I didn't do this, then this would happen, and I think that this movie goes really far to say that stop worrying about it so much. There are so many elements beyond your control that make your choices and be comfortable with them instead of doing the John Cusack and High Fidelity thing and saying, well, I refuse to commit to anything because I don't want to get hurt or whatever.
Well, take the 2.5-hour runtime of Mr. Nobody and that concept and boil it down to the 15 seconds in the Hudsucker Proxy when Paul Newman is hanging out of a window and thinks back about when he got his pants hemmed and he passed on the super strength stitching and and sewed it in for him anyways because Mr. Hudsucker is such a nice guy.
No, but that's irony. This is different. That's just irony. This is far more. This is just far more of how you address your own personal narrative. I think they're different things.
I think this is more like the problem of that really what he's sort of elaborating on is this problem of like, are you sort of trapped by your choices? For instance, maybe you make a movie and you have to star Jared Leto in it, and you have no control over that.
It's very meta.
Okay.
And you only have so many wigs you can throw on them.
You really, yeah, boy. Once you get to that last wig, the movie's over.
Well, but you've always got the old man voice. I know Jay it's his favorite thing to do the old man Jared Leto voice.
As soon as the movie opens with that, it's all over. It truly is. What did I do to deserve this? And I do not mistake that for all movies. Old man makeup or people acting old are terrible. This particular one is terrible.
Young Guns 2.
Beautiful.
Well, I wish I had the passion for this movie that I did 4 years ago, but watching it this time, I think one of the things that I'm still really keen on and what I really latch onto is just, even if I'm not as interested in what it is or isn't trying to say or structurally what it's doing, but there's a charm about it. There's a warmth to it. When you mention Mr. Sandman or Buddy Holly's Every Day, these classic songs that just come in really crisp, really clear. I already said visually, I just like how warmth it is. But I also just like the story of the two young teenagers in love. I felt that was a really genuine relationship right there. And
you mean the Juno
Temple and the other kid.
Which admittedly probably gets the most screen time.
Yeah, and I really just latch onto them. I like any scenes that they're in. I like anything with Sarah Polley. I love her character, in terms of watching. I enjoy watching that performance. Leto, I think he's fine. But there's these other people where, like you said, Kurt, Juno Temple's, that story probably gets the most screen time. You get to see her a lot, and I like Diane Kruger too. I mean, she's not amazing or anything in this movie. I don't think anybody's really amazing, but the whole movie just has this warmth and charm to it that I pretty much immediately latch onto. Like even just the futuristic world, it's cold and white and you don't really like anybody, but there's something about it that just feels friendly.
The guy from all the Mike Leigh films, the doctor with the Rorschach tattoos.
That's not, if you're thinking David Thewlis, it's totally
no, it's not David Thewlis.
But
it's
it
the
looks
guy
like
who
him.
He played Sullivan in Topsy Turvy. He's in a lot of Mike Leigh films. It's not David Thewlis, but he's still in a lot of Mike Leigh films.
I don't know.
Can't remember his name.
Something about all that stuff. It's very fairy tale, and I appreciate the fairy tale-ness of this movie. I like watching Rhys Ifans do his thing, and just the weird, like, homey 1970s, early 80s. Again, kind of a Jean-Pierre Jeunet aesthetic. to the whole thing. Like, it's all, even when it's cold and sad and dark and people are dying, there's something charming about all of it.
Should there be?
I don't know. I think that was his intent. It seems like it is anyway. Like, even when they're, the kids are being forced to be broken up, the way the camera will transition from under the sheets to all of a sudden, like, the pavement of the street, and the camera comes up. Again, not that that's anything new. I mean, fucking, what's the one where the immortals cut off each other's
The Highlander.
heads?
I was thinking that Russell Mulcahy did that,
But so what? And, like, all these borrowings from other movies, I'm not gonna... I totally agree with Jay. You can see all of the influences here, and I'm happy with those influences. I love the fact that the Mars bit reminds me of Danny Boyle's Sunshine. I love the fact that, like, a broken pot or something reminds me of Amelie. I revel in the raindrop falling down that kind of reminds me of Forrest Gump. Or the train tracks going over something. Like, there's stuff here that I would equate to Oliver Stone's visual aesthetic in some ways, and some of his crazy editing. Like, when you mash all that stuff together, you can say it's a mess if you want, but I just like seeing all those influences coming together in one big splotch.
And I want to, and I certainly I like that Synecdoche was brought up. I'm certainly not equating the fact that I enjoy and like a lot of the ideas of Mr. Nobody to say that it's a great film that no one sees properly. That's not the narrative that I'm putting forth. But I am saying that I do get a lot of pleasure, and I do come back to this movie. So I think that there's an audience for this movie that never found it. But is it necessarily a wide audience, or is this movie belong in the upper tiers of sci-fi or philosophy or whatever sort of filmmaking? Not necessarily, but it seemed that there was. I was surprised at some of the hate and vitriol that was leveled, or the like Andrew said at the beginning, the fact that this movie was just utterly ignored. I was kind of surprised by that when it came out back in.
I don't expect everybody to love it either. Like, I'm not fighting for it, but at the same time, yeah, I'm baffled by nobody's here to, like, there's not even any sort of cult following behind it, and it seems like it's absolutely the type of movie that a certain fairly large crowd, I think, would get into.
And I'll say this: it's miles ahead of Kurt Wimmer's Equilibrium.
Well, yeah.
In regards to the cult.
Well, no, but that's a movie that had a huge cult following wrap around it by the simple fact that it was an unreleased film, and people thought, like, they adopted it like a discovery, and it's a messy, ugly film, right?
I kind of, just based on the sort of lightweight or lighter weight treatment of the ideas and stuff, we've all sort of agreed that something like Synecdoche is far superior, but I think the other movie that I chuck into this category is I Heart Huckabees. Like,
I love I Heart Huckabees. We've actually talked about that on this podcast.
Well, there you go. I missed that one, but I think both those movies are they're limited. Like,
they're gateway films. They're exactly that. They're a movie that just throws a lot of ideas out that, again, a casual person could come in and maybe like a certain aspect of the movie. They're like Cliff Notes kind of. No, Cliff Notes, Reader's Digest. I don't know what the right book analogy is.
I think Reader's Digest, you're on the right track.
Yeah, right. Okay, we'll go with that.
They're surveys of these things instead of being genuine. Exploration.
And if that opens you up, I mean, you could argue Quentin Tarantino's a far better filmmaker, but you could argue that Quentin Tarantino's films exist like that in their own way, in that they will lead people to other things by virtue of watching them. Yeah.
I think in regards to why Mr. Nobody hasn't been seen or isn't considered a cult classic is I feel that it plays like an attempt at constructing a cult classic. You look at something like Donnie Darko, which kind of blew up and was purchased by college film students or just college students in general around the country and blew up into this cult thing. When you come out with a movie with a character named Nemo Nobody, it just feels so constructed and an attempt at capitalizing on some prior success or some prior idea of what makes a cult classic. And I'm not saying that
you mean it's trying to recreate that particular lightning in a bottle.
Yes. And I don't think it's hiding it well.
And it's not nearly as good a device as calling your main character hero and protagonist. So,
yes, I'm a huge fan of Snow Crash, and I hope that someone out there will eventually make that into the film instead of just sticking it in the corner of something like Pontypool as a cute reference.
Okay. Is there anything else anybody wants to say about it? Nope.
I guess I even have some trouble following the characters because this idea that almost like every outcome is possible or every path is the right path seems to just undercut the drama in the film for me.
Well, again, I would never say that Mr. Nobody is aiming to be a conventional drama. It's far more of a sit back and look at it structure film than a let's get deep down into the heart. The characters are all designed to be types. I would never hold this movie to the standard of hitting like these really hard human truths in its scenes. I think of it far more as a structural movie than a.
But it attempts to exploit that drama. I mean, the stuff with the drunken version of the father and bathing him in the shower,
But now I in my Earth 2 version of watching these movies, Cloud Atlas came out before Mr. Nobody, and I adored Cloud Atlas and hate Mr. Nobody. Who knows?
Let me ask this. Not that I want it recounted for me, but is there anybody at this table who Mr. Nobody from a plot or in any sort of way makes perfect sense from start to finish? Like, do you get every single moment throughout the movie? Is there anybody here that can say that?
I can't.
No, I didn't think so. Like, there's points where you're just it's almost like it's in here as Jay would say, probably like wankery, like poetic wankery, visual. I'm just throwing in here to make it look like I'm saying something, even if I'm not. It just looks cool.
This is all references to Europe aside. This thing ain't a Swiss watch, man. There's some extra pieces in the box.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's evident in the final credits when they're like, "Oh yeah, here's all the parts we didn't put in."
Yeah. But that's again back to my issue is if that's the case, then I would at least expect the aesthetics and the treatment of the overall concept to be handled with more originality. Like if I'm not going to get an actual story that makes sense, or if I'm not supposed to get invested in the characters because the concept is key, then I want that concept to be mind-blowing, and it's not.
Well, I do come back to the idea of human beings and human choices and human lives being, using entropy as a metaphor for that, and then having the film culminate where when he does finally lock everything down or whatever in his own mind, and he finds the cosmic right girl in his, collection of possibilities, as he sees it, that time stops and starts to go backwards. I like that. I like the ending of the movie, and I don't believe I've seen that in any other film done anywhere near like that. So with all of his ripping off and whatever, I like the ending, and I think that the ending is it's one contribution, and I think it's a good contribution.
All right, I think that we'll just kind of wrap up this discussion then. Since the people who participate in each episode of the Movie Club sort of decide on the next films that we'll be watching for the next episode. And did we not decide that we're going to be watching David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch and also Winterbottom's Tristram Shandy, A Cock and Bull Story? Is that what we're going with?
Tristram Shandy was my suggestion. You guys are free to leave it if you don't want it. But
I love talking Tristram Shandy. I'm totally happy with grouping them. My grouping was a bit more on the nose, and I like the Linkletter film as well, Scanner Darkly. But no, I think there's lots of fun things to chew on in Tristram Shandy, and I am totally looking forward to revisiting The Naked Lunch, which I have not seen in 10 years at least. So,
and for the record, I have nominated Naked Lunch for the last 15 episodes, so I'm happy that I'll finally get to buckle down and watch it. What else do I need to say?
Well, thank you very much, Matt Price. This is the first one that you've done. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you come back.
I had a great time. Hopefully I didn't overstay my welcome. I had a great time.
Yeah, it was good. Good having you. We'll have to bring on the other half of Mamo at some point.
No. He can't. No, that's fine. Yeah.
and I want to thank Jay too for coming in. Like it's tough coming in and doing this kind of format when you don't
the
like
world.
All of them, and there's more than one or more than two, which is the usual format. So I think that.
And I have to say, Jay, you ripped on a movie that I really, really liked, and I don't dislike you afterwards. It's really, it's a pleasure.
Well, I think the one that you really, really liked is the one that's hardest for me to rip on, because my reason for disliking it is probably not. It's not easy to explain. It's just like more of a purely subjective kind of thing. So I found it like I have notes for Another Earth and Mr. Nobody, but Bellflower I have like 4 notes and they're all really shallow observations. So it's a tough one to really explain. It's just like you either like the taste of olives or you don't, I guess.
Well, olives are for adults, so.
So I guess we'll be back in a month or a month and a half or 2 months
or 6 months.
9 months.
We just don't know.
And we'll talk about Naked Lunch and Tristram Shandy. So we go around the table one more time, just to let everybody know. First of all, this episode can be found at movieclubpodcast.blogspot.com. We lost our official domain, but whatever. So, and my name is Andrew James, and I'm from row3.com.
And I'm Matthew Price, and I'm half of Mamo. You can find all Mamo-related stuff at mamo.ca. The podcast itself is hosted very kindly by Row3, so you can find the Mamo podcast proper at row3.com.
And Twitter handle?
Oh, and my Twitter handle is MattMovies, MattMovies.
Again, I'm Kurt. You can find me all over the place, but mostly at Row3. But God knows I pop up in a lot of different places. And my Twitter is at Triflick.
And I'm Jay. You can find me at the Film Junk podcast at filmjunk.com and the documentaryblog.com. Rarely.
Very good. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. As I said, the URL is movieclubpodcast.blogspot.com. Go over there and leave your thoughts in the comment section. We'll be stopping in there from time to time, so if you have anything you want to say about any of these movies, we'd love to hear it. So, thanks for listening. Until next time, bye-bye.
Cheers.
I say love, life will be bland, but we'll be okay. As love sends us floating away, I said lo and behold, as life takes its toll, and I thought I'd never grow old. I said lo and behold, as life takes its toll, and I thought I'd never